Good evening and welcome to our midweek Bible study this week at the Fulton Church of Christ. We appreciate you joining us here tonight as we are still doing our virtual sessions. We hope to have an update soon about the next Sunday, if we will be back in person, or let you know when we will be back. But we do appreciate everyone's patience and everyone's help during this time. Remember, real quick announcement, remember on Tuesdays we will have our FBI. We have that those videos being posted at 9 a.m. on Tuesday morning. I encourage you if you want to watch those and pay attention or follow along with us. We have books at the church building that go along with our FBI. Also, remember we have books for our Wednesday night service. We had those laid out during our last contribution, our communion set out. If you need a book and you didn't get a book or would want a book, please contact the church office. We can get one of those books to you that you can have so that you can follow along with us. So for tonight, we are in Leviticus chapter 3. Leviticus chapter 3, as we begin talking about the peace offerings. Remember we talked about a few weeks ago, there were 5 main offerings here. We have the burnt offering, we have the grain offering, we have the peace offering, the sin offering, and then we'll have the guilt offering. So those are our main sacrifices that we have talked about, 2 of which we talked about so far, the burnt offering and the peace offering. And then next week we're going to get into the sin offering. We're going to cover chapter 3 tonight as we talk about these peace offerings, and then we're going to look a little bit at chapter 7 so we can see a little more about this peace offering. As we have been doing, remember this is the book of Leviticus. This is a book about for the priest. Can you click on PowerPoint? Okay. This is the book for the priest, a handbook of what the priests are doing. Remember we talked about that last week, that as we look at this, the first part of this will be what the worshiper should do. The second part will be what the priest should do. And so this is teaching the priests what they ought to do. Just as introduction, we'll go through our outline in our book and on our slides. These peace offerings were made as an act of thanksgiving, or they were as a result of a vow or voluntary offering, usually on a joyous occasion. So again, we'll talk about this in just a minute. These were voluntary, and what these were peace offerings. This was peace not as peace as absence of war, absence of conflict, but as we notice here, it signified the serenity or completeness found only in serving God and developing a close relationship with Him. So what we see is this peace is not peace as an absence of conflict, but it is a completeness, a wholeness of self, of wanting to be at peace with God, if you will. And I don't mean that again as a conflict with God, but as being in fellowship with God. And that's another way we're going to look at this. These sacrifices. These sacrifices could be different than the burnt offering because they could be either male or female. They had to be without blemish. Again, only the best was for God. But they could be male or female, and it could have been any of 3 different things. It could be the fat of a cow, a sheep, or a goat that was burned. So it was just like the other offerings. There were various different things offered. The exception here is the bird. There is no bird mentioned here. There's just these. Again, this is because this was a voluntary offering. Again, the burnt offering is something that was voluntary, but was a necessity for everyone to make. Not everyone had to make these peace offerings. And this peace offering is a little different as well. We'll see that in just a minute. As we see, this, as mentioned earlier, this was a voluntary sacrifice. This was a sacrifice the people made on a voluntary basis to ensure their relationship with God, to ensure they're in that right step with God. This sacrifice also included forgiveness of sins. Now, we see that by the laying on of hands. And what I mean is that, again, they're told to take their hands and lay it on the head of the animal. To lay the hands on the head of the animal was an idea of transferring sin to that animal to be sacrificed on behalf of that. And so this peace offering, though it wasn't the same as the burnt offering that gave atonement, it was tied again and connected to forgiveness of sins. There is some forgiveness instituted in here. And like I say, exactly how this all worked, we can't flesh this out all the way, but we see that there is that connection between the two. The sacrifice also was to be made by the person making the sacrifice, would join with the officiating priest in eating a sacrificial meal that remained. And we'll talk about this, as I said a minute ago. We'll look at Leviticus 7 and see the continuation of the peace offerings. There's 2 times they're mentioned here. In chapter 3, we're not told about this eating together, but in chapter 7 we are. And so chapter 7 is going to show us about what happens, what they would do. And again, there's only a piece and parts of this offering that were given to God. The rest were for the priest that has separate jobs, and we'll see that in this part. But there's also a part for the worshiper. They would have this meal together. And again, this is almost like the idea of I hate to use the word, but almost like a fellowship meal. And a fellowship between that person and God. This was part of their sacrifice, was to partake this meal, to eat it, and that was part of their worship to God. Then finally, this sacrifice was supplemented with 3 types of cakes. And when I mean cake, I don't mean cake like we do with icing. This cake is talking about bread. 3 different ways of making bread, and they were to be offered, and then they were to be eaten that day. Part was to be offered, and part was to be eaten. And eating this was connected to what this sacrifice was about. So with that in mind, with the overview of what we're going to look at, let's go back and let's look at Leviticus chapter 3. Let's start in verse 1, and let's read about what they're supposed to do. Notice starting in verse 3. Verse 1. Leviticus 3. If his offering is a sacrifice of peace offering, if he offers an animal from the herd, male or female, he shall offer it without blemish before the Lord. And he shall lay his hand on the head of his offering and kill it at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And Aaron's sons, the priests, shall throw the blood against the sides of the altar. And from the sacrifice of the peace offering as a food offering to the Lord, he shall offer the fat covering the entrails and all the fat that is on the entrails, and the 2 kidneys with the fat that is on them, that the loins, and the long lobe of the liver that he shall remove with the kidneys. Then Aaron's son shall burn it on the altar on top of the burnt offering, which is on the wood of the fire. It is a food offering with a pleasing aroma to the Lord. So you notice this first one. Again, notice we said a minute ago there could be 3 different types of these sacrifices, as we talked about here. And that is, the first was that it could be a cow. And this is the idea here of a animal of the herd in verse 1. The animal of the herd is a reference to the cow, to the cattle. We talked about that last week with the burnt offering. It had to be a bull, had to be male. This one, it could be male or female. And so this offering was to be brought to God. It was to be without blemish. Again, the priest would check it out, and if it was approved, it would be offered. And so you notice verse 2, and this is what I talk about. There's forgiveness tied here, because he shall lay his hand on the head of his offering. And laying the hand on the head, again, was that idea of transferring the guiltness of sin to this animal. And so what it would do is he'd lay his hand on it, then he'd kill it. Now notice this one is killed at the entrance to the tent of meeting. It's not told to be killed at the altar, but at a different place. And so it's supposed to be killed at a certain place. And then again, just like the burnt offering, the sons of Aaron, the priests will come in, they'll take the blood, and they'll throw it against all the sides of the altar. And this was part of the peace offering. And then you notice that they're going to take the peace offering, verse 3, and use it as a food offering, is what it's called too. Again, that idea that it is offered as a food. And so the idea is that this is a offering to God that is to be consumed by Him. An offering that and again, the idea I believe here as a food offering is that this would be an offering that they would make that would satisfy and feed God as well as feed them. And again, that's not literally feeding God, but the idea of, I told you this was, I had the connection to fellowship, in that they would sit down to eat and God would consume the fat and they would consume the meat. And again, the question comes up, why does God ask for fat? Well, we don't know. Some have thought this may tie to Gentile rituals, that the Gentiles may like this. There were certain fats that were considered to be delicacies and the most valuable portion of a meat. And so most people think that's probably the reason, that the fat was viewed as a delicacy. And this was the idea of giving God the best, giving God the best that was there. And so God asked for this offering. And then you notice that this offering is to be made. And you notice that what God asked for is the fat covering the entrails, the fat that's on the entrails, and then the two kidneys, the lobe of the liver that's moved with the kidneys, the fat that's on the loins. So this fat, again, probably a delicate part, is to be offered to God. And so what's going to happen is that Aaron's sons, and this is sort of an interesting phrase in verse 5, is Aaron's sons takes the fat from this bull and they put it on the altar. Now, what's interesting is it says here in verse 5 that they're to burn it on the altar on top of the burnt offering. Well, what does the burnt offering have to do with this? Well, what's usually thought is that, again, the burnt offering must be made every morning and every night. Every morning, every evening, 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. And what some historians, biblical thinkers think is that we don't really know because we haven't experimented with this necessarily, but is if you burn a carcass, it takes a while. And so what this may be implying is that the burnt offering is still burning, meaning you don't have to wait for one offering to be completely consumed before you can offer the second one. And so God is saying that when you offer that morning offering, although it's not completely consumed, you can put this new offering on top of it. And it will be devoured too. And then again, notice that this will be an offering to God as a sweet savor, a food for Him, a food offering. And again, this is the idea that God will eat with the people who offered this. And so that's the idea of the herd. We pick back up in verse 6. It says, if his offering for a sacrifice of peace offering to the Lord is an animal from the flock, male or female, he shall offer it without blemish. If he offers the lamb for his offering, then he shall offer it before the Lord. Lay his hand on the head of his offering, and kill it kill it in front of the tent of meeting. And Aaron's son shall throw its blood against the side of the altars. Then from the sacrifices of the peace offering he shall offer as a food offering to the Lord its fat. He shall remove the fat tail, cut off close to the backbone, and the fat that covers the entrails, and all the fat that is on the entrails, and the two kidneys with the fat that is on them at the loins, and the long lobe of the liver, that he may remove with the kidneys. And the priest shall burn it on the altar as a food offering to the Lord. So again, notice he says that the lamb is to be offered, again, very similarly to the bull or to the cow, in that is both male or female, again, without blemish, without anything wrong. Again, the best is for God. It's not one of your sheep that's going to die anyway, so you say, hey, let's just give it to God. No, you have to give him something good. You have to give him the best. And so again, you take the fat. Again, you slaughter it. The blood is cast on the altar. The hand is put on it. Not in that order, but those three things are done. The fat is cut out, and this one actually gives us an idea, some people say, because of what sheep this is. There is a certain type of sheep, and I forget what it's called now. I think it's called a fat-tailed sheep or something like that. That has this vertebrae, the backbone, actually extends into its tail. It's one of the few animals that do that. And what happens is this backbone, the vertebrae that extend into the tail, allow fat to build up in that tail. And in certain cultures, this goes back to what we said a minute ago, in certain cultures, that fat on the tail is a delicacy, is the most desirable part of those sheep. And so God asked for that part. God says, when you sacrifice these animals to me, you take that part, you burn it up, and that's my offering, or that's your offering to me. And so this is what they did for the sheep. We pick back up verse 12. He says, if his offering is a goat, then he shall offer it before the Lord, and lay his hands on its head, and kill it in front of the tent of meeting, and the sons of Aaron shall throw its blood against the sides of the altar. Then he shall offer from it as his offering for a food offering to the Lord, the fat covering the entrails, and all the fat that is in the entrails, and the two kidneys with the fat that is on them at the loins, the long lobe of the liver, that he shall remove with the kidneys. And the priest shall burn them on the fire as a food offering with a pleasing aroma. All fat is the Lord's. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations and all your dwelling places, that you eat neither fat nor blood. So here we see the goat is given, and again the goat is separated from the flock, and it's not the sheep, but it's a goat. And the goat is to be taken. Again, they lay the hand on the head, they kill the goat, they take the blood, they spatter the side of the altar, they cut out the fat and around the entrails and the kidneys and the lobe of the liver, and they throw all this on the altar. It's going to burn up. And then you notice he's going to be a pleasing aroma. And then we get to verse 16, and there's a phrase added that is interesting in that it says that all fat is the Lord's. Now, we get a general discussion here, a general command. We've seen half of this before. Notice the next verse. In all generations, all your dwelling places, you need to eat fat, nor eat drink, or nor the blood. We've seen that before. Back in Genesis 9, we're told when Moses comes off the ark and God tells him he can eat meat, he says, shall not drink the blood. And repeatedly throughout the Bible that you're not to drink the blood, not to eat the blood. Now pagans would do that, but the Israelites were not to do it. Here we're told not only they're not supposed to eat the blood, they're not supposed to eat the fat either. The fat is supposed to be saved because the fat is God's. And so this was the general command that they were not to eat the fat off of any animal. And so this is the basic breakdown of chapter 3. Now I told you before we finish chapter 3, we're going to look at chapter 7, because if you go to chapter 7 of Leviticus and you look at beginning of verse 11, we're not going to read this entire context because there's more than peace offering here, but we're going to look at specifically at chapter 11 verses 11. Chapter 7, verse 11 through verse 18, we're going to see that God's going to give some more commands regarding the peace offering. And this is going to be where he talks about what they're going to eat with it. Notice what he says, you shall regard them as detestable. You shall not eat of their flesh, and you shall detest their carcass. Oh, sorry, I hit the wrong chapter. I told y'all Leviticus 7, and I read Leviticus 11. Leviticus 7. And let's go down again to verse 11. Let's try this again. And this is the law of the sacrifice of peace offerings that one may offer to the Lord. If he offers it for thanksgiving, then he shall offer with the thanksgiving sacrifice unleavened loaves mixed with oil, unleavened wafers smeared with oil, and loaves of fine flour well mixed with oil. With the sacrifice of his peace offerings for thanksgiving, he shall bring his offering with loaves of leavened bread. And from it he shall offer one loaf from each offering as a gift to the Lord. It shall belong to the priest who throws the blood on the peace offering. And the flesh of the sacrifice of his peace offering for thanksgiving shall be eaten on the day of his offering. He shall not leave any of it until the morning. But if the sacrifice of his offering is a vow offering or a freewill offering, it shall be eaten on the day that he offers his sacrifice, and on the next day what remains of it shall be eaten. But what remains of the flesh of the sacrifice on the third day shall be burned up with fire. If any of the flesh of the sacrifice of his peace offering is eaten on the third day, he who offers it shall not be accepted, neither shall it be credited to him. It is tainted, and he who eats of it shall bear his iniquity. So notice what he lays out here. He lays out some additional stipulations. Number one is that along with the peace offering, he's to offer 3 different baked goods, 3 different cakes, as he said here. Notice verse 12. When he offers this thanksgiving, and again, the peace offering is a thanksgiving offering. Again, thanking God for that peaceful state, thanking God for being in a good relationship with Him. Notice he's to offer one unleavened loaves mixed with oil, unleavened wafers smeared with oil, and loaves of fine flour mixed well with oil. So those 3 things: the unleavened loaf, the unleavened wafers, and the loaf of fine flour. And so he's offered these cakes alongside. And again, these cakes were part of the sacrifice. And again, these cakes were brought, but they weren't to be burned up. You know, we talked about last week, the grain offering was to be put in the fire and devoured. This one was not devoured by the fire. This was one devoured by people. And that's what we see in this next part, that he shall eat the loaves. Again, the loaves, one of each loaf, was to be given to the priest. Notice verse 14. He shall offer one loaf from each offering as a gift to God. It shall belong to the priest who throws the blood on the peace offering. Again, the priest who puts the blood on the side of the altar gets one of each loaf. The rest of that is to be eaten. You notice verse 15. The rest is to be eaten in thanksgiving. And depending on this is for a thanksgiving offering or to fulfill a vow, which is another way of these peace offerings working, is if you made a vow to God that you would do something for Him or to neglect something for a while and come back to Him. This was to be eaten over 2 days. But if it was not, if it was a Thanksgiving, it had to be eaten that day. And this was not eaten by the priest, but eaten by the worshiper. And so what would happen with this meat is they would offer the fat to God, then they would take the meat and cook it. and they would eat it. Both all the Levites would be there, along with the worshiper. And so this was another way of God providing for the Levites, in that as people brought these sacrifices, they would share the meal. They would share this fellowship meal. And again, this fellowship meal would be with the priest to acknowledge them for their service, acknowledge them for what they've done, and how they have served as a mediator between God and man, but also as a way of fellowshipping with God, eating with God. Remember, during this time, God's got the fat. They got the fat on the fire that's burning up, and that is God's part. And so God is devouring that, figuratively, on the fire and having that sweet-smelling aroma, as they are literally devouring the flesh as part of this offering. And so we see the peace offering is another offering that is given. But again, notice verse 17, this peace offering can be done wrong. If the peace offering was given for a vow, but you wait 3 days to eat, notice he says it's like you never offered it. The sacrifice is not counted to you. The sacrifice is not accepted. That it is tainted, and whoever eats it shall bear his iniquity. So basically, whatever sin you put on this this offering that you were forgiven, he basically says comes back on you, and you're responsible for it. And so this is the idea that the peace offering was to be an offering to God that gives peace and fellowship between man and God. And what is interesting about this offering is that this offering, again, ties to us, because we have a peace offering. Because just the same way that these offerings were to make God in fellowship with the Jews, we have the peace offering of Christ. In Christ's sacrifice on the cross, he brought man and God together. He is the mediator. He brought man in fellowship with God. 1 John will talk about that. That's only through the blood of Christ and walking in the light that we can have fellowship with God. And that is through Christ, that peace offering. And that peace is not the absence of conflict. Again, it's not the absence and the skipping of conflict. But peace is the idea of completeness, of being one, being together, being united. Again, being in fellowship with one another. And again, what a great thought that peace offering. And again, notice the peace offering was not just in bringing fellowship with God and man together, but it also brought man and man together. And as a worshiper and his family ate with the priest and his family, they were all fellowshipping together. They were all worshiping God and devouring this peace offering that brought peace to all people and brought peace to those who partake of it and peace in their offering to God. So that's Leviticus chapter 3. That's Leviticus 3 along with Leviticus 7, talking about the peace offering. That's all we have for tonight. Next week, whether we're in person or on video, we will go into chapter 4. And chapter 4 is going to be maybe a couple weeks, because it's going to be about the sin offering. And we're going to start to see again some really good connections between what they did versus what we have through Christ. But for tonight, as we think about the peace offering, let's think about that peace that we have through God, that peace that surpasses all understanding. Again, it's not the absence of conflict, but it's the completeness, being one with God, being in fellowship with God. And as we say this, again, I hope that you are at peace with God. I hope you have that completeness, that oneness, that connection that connects you to God and brings you to peace and brings you at oneness with Him so that you can be His faithful child. If you're not, then we encourage you to contact us and find out how you can make that better. But again, we thank you for your attention. Thank you for being here. Remember, Sunday morning, if we do virtual, we'll be at 10 a.m. If not, we'll begin our class at 9:30 a.m. Don't forget our FBI. If you'd like to tune into that, that's every Tuesday at 9 a.m. Those videos are available anytime after they post after 9 o'clock on Tuesday. And you'll have all those online by the time we're through with that class for your benefit to come watch it anytime you see fit. But for tonight, we appreciate you being here, appreciate you tuning in, and we hope that you're having a God-blessed week.